we're missing Justin too. Someone else is gonna have to ask questions if Justin's not here. You guys realize that, right?
Isa, all you.
The most quiet one on the call. Now I don't know. Mike's pretty quiet too. All right, let's kick off. Let's kick off sleep. So we've got that article. That article was one of the level three study guides, but I think it's very, very practical on what we're doing every day, you know, as coaches and as even more so athletes inside the gym. Um, Before I forget, there's also a book called Why We Sleep that is a really, really good book as well. So if you want to dive deeper into this subject, which I do recommend diving deeper, because I think if you say, you know, sleep and diet are the top two things, I think if you take sleep away, the diet doesn't even matter as much. So I think sleep's probably the most important. So that book, Why We Sleep, is a really good one to dive in on. I know it's on like Audible and Spotify if you have Spotify too, so you don't even have to read it. So I don't want to forget about mentioning that if you want to dive in.
Nate,
So
also, I wanted to just interject. I found for my sports medicine class that I teach, I actually found this really good YouTube video of this I can't think of his name, but he's like a doctor that like studies sleep and he like went over like the stages of sleep and how it affects athletic performance specifically. I'll look for it and I'll send it in a group chat. It's a pretty good one. It's like an hour long video. Pretty
yeah,
good.
Matthew Walker.
I don't remember off the top of my head, but maybe.
definitely
He's
send
been
that.
my Yeah, he's my go-to. He talks a lot about performance as well, and he's been really informed on some of the more newer research because I saw like this article that we were looking at was from 2017, and he has some newer stuff that he's been introducing.
If you have anything too on the subject, Justin, like send that in the group also.
Yeah, I'll send
Um,
it. Hooperman just did a whole big series on sleep with the guy Matthew Walker,
does he have
so I'll
that in his
send over the
podcast?
link. Huh?
Does he
What'd you
have
say?
him on his podcast?
Yeah, he has Matthew Walker on the podcast.
That might be a good listen.
I'll
Yeah,
send it.
definitely send that. Yeah, because I think sleep is, I don't think sleep is one of the most important things. Like you can be doing everything perfect, and if you're not sleeping, forget it. On so many levels. So before I jump into it, I also took some like extra little notes on some research I did too. Before I go through, what was like some of you guys' takeaways, and it could be thoughts of like what you're doing personally, even and how it's affecting you. You guys have anything there?
I mean, I know if I don't sleep, I just don't function.
Feel like
I
shit.
Yeah, I mean, take today, for example, I had to get up early for class and, I didn't sleep well last night at all. I kept getting up and stuff and I'm tired right now. Like I'm supposed to go do a workout. I don't feel like going to do a workout. And I, didn't get the good recovery from the growth hormone being released because I didn't sleep well. And
Well,
I
that
actually woke up hungry.
and on top of it too, like you could sleep your 7 8 hours, and if it's not, that's why I think what you're going to send in the group later is going to be really important. If it's not in the right zones, you also don't really get the benefit too. So it's not just sleep's definitely not just how much sleep am I getting time wise. It's also the quality that you're
Yeah.
getting through the night as well. So that's a huge factor to pay attention to. It's part of the reason Whoop is as successful as they are, you know, for these trackers, because people are waking up and checking their Whoop, and it's giving them data on how well they recovered. And that's why that Whoop's just seeing where that person is in their cycles of sleep and then engaging off of that. So as far as sleep goes, I'm going to start to just go through some of the hormones that it's going to affect. And kind of as we tie up the call today, we're going to like take a step back to look at this big picture of like what the hormones are happening in sleep, and like then we're going to talk about stress and how that can snowball into so many issues that we deal with as athletes and with our clients as well. So, like Elise said, it's our best cheat code, right? We get growth hormone. You hear people even taking human growth hormone like as a performance enhancer, but we make it naturally, and half to just about over half of how much our body makes naturally, it happens in sleep. It doesn't only just happen in sleep; it's the first half of the night of sleep in our circadian rhythm. So even if you are like on this flip cycle and you're going to bed at 1 a.m., you're also still missing, even if you're sleeping 8 hours, like where that cycle is and some of that growth hormone production. So as shitty as it is, having a wind down routine and getting to bed, as early as possible for what you're able to do is really important for that. And then if you're an athlete and you're looking to compete and push that boundary, like that is huge, is a priority, for that. You don't want to miss that cycle. Repairs muscles, repairs tendons, ligaments, all that stuff as well. So it's literally pre-performance enhancement. So we want to take advantage of that. Our next hormone is leptin. You guys remember what leptin does?
Repress hunger.
Yeah, so leptins are like, I don't need to eat hormone. Leptin's what kicks in when we're eating and we realize we're full. Leptin's starting to do its job. I'm going to take a side tangent on that in a second. So it represses appetites. It regulates insulin. So when we talk about, someone that, has some chronic disease going and they're becoming insulin resistant and they're becoming pre-diabetic or diabetic, all these things, like looking at sleep is going to be really important because if they don't have the leptin helping regulate that, then they're going to start having all those cravings and things are going to be all over the place. What else does that remind you of? What's something that we do that's super common that's going to help it regulate insulin and blood sugar levels? Intermittent fasting.
Movement.
Well, I was thinking at night. Sorry, Justin. But like intermittent fasting, right? All we're doing when we're sleeping is we are intermittent fasting. But when we do that on purpose, like into the daytime, we're just intentionally growing that. Can be a really good thing for a diabetic. So like if we have someone that's very, very insulin resistant and we want to start to get that under control, doing some intermittent fast can be beneficial. Because the leptin, it gets thrown off, then we have all these like weird cravings and things like that. It goes right into that flip cycle with cortisol also, which I'll dive more into that when we talk about stress. So everything's off. Person doesn't want to eat in the morning. They don't really have an appetite. They have a really hard time getting up. They're super groggy. And then through the day, eventually they like have an energy boost. They get appetites. And what ends up happening is they end up staying up late. So they're making the cycle worse. And then what happens when you don't eat all day long and then you have energy at night? They end up binge eating. And then we know obviously that's a problem. For leptin, a really good piece of advice you can give people. This is not to do with sleep, but just ghrelin and leptin, your hunger hormone versus your suppressant hormone. If you slow people down when they eat and have them try to chew their food well, it'll give the brain and the hormone more time to communicate, and people will realize that they're full when they should realize they're full. Versus me at a buffet, I am full 15 minutes before I realize I'm full. And then when I realize I'm full, it's a problem. Right? We've all at least been guilty of that one time. So that's just you're outpacing that hormone communication from gut to brain. So slowing things down there for someone that's trying to lose weight, something as simple as chewing and putting their fork down can help those hormones work better and keep them from overeating at meal times. And then we have our cortisol. Couple things raise it. Stress raises it. When we train, that's a stressful event, that raises it. And then we have one thing that really reduces it, that's sleep. So it's like we have these events in our day that are going to happen every day that are going to bring that level up. And then we have a chance to reset that level basically at night. If we miss that chance, then it's just we get deeper into the hole, deeper in the hole, and deeper in the hole. And it kind of becomes like a snowball eventually over time, which I'm going to talk about once we talk about stress as well. Questions on like the hormones and what the body's doing in sleep. Cool. I'm going to kind of come back to it when we talk about stress, when we look at big picture. So let's say you're struggling with sleep or you have someone that's struggling with sleep. What are some things that you can start to look at to help that process, to help you wind down, to go to bed, stay asleep, get good quality. What's some advice you have? This was not in the article. This is just some extra stuff I want to touch on.
So we used to, when I worked at a doctor's office, we used to give advice to people like, it's like if you're starting to wind down, like technically any sort of light stimulates the brain. So the cell phone, the TV, if you're reading on your Kindle, I mean a light in your room, like your brain is stimulated. So they say to obviously just like limit the stimulation of the brain. So, a lot of people try to fall asleep with the TV on, like shut the TV off, turn the phone off. Also keep it like dark and cool because that kind of tends to help you fall asleep faster as well. And then don't eat like if you're about to go to bed, don't eat like a half hour before.
All super spot on. The light, it's specifically blue light is what's gonna like affect the brain the most. So our brain equates blue light to sunlight, and then that throws off circadian rhythms. So like basically it's our brain just kind of getting confused on like what time of day is it? Am I supposed to be going to sleep now and resting, or am I supposed to be getting up and getting active? Um, it's incredibly sensitive. I want to say it was in the book Why We Sleep. I don't remember where I read this, but they did experiments on these collegiate athletes where they had them hooked up to like to see their brain waves, and they would just shine a pin drop light on the back of someone's knee. So not even on the same plane of their body, and their brain was able to start to register that there was light, and they would start to have increased brain activity. So like just goes to show how sensitive we actually are. Things people don't think about, like Elise obviously talked about the cell phone. That's going to be one. The TV is going to be a big one. People who read on Kindles is going to be one. All of those have applications where you can put a filter on and it'll take blue light out. You're not going to like it if you've never done it. It makes your phone look really weird, but at least it's like a step in the right direction. Because like I think the reality is how many of us at 7 p.m. are like, no more phones, no more TV. I'm starting my wind down practice. Like not many people are going to be that locked in. So using those filters, and you can set your phone, your TV, whatever it's going to be on timers that it'll automatically turn on at sunset. Can be a good way to start to limit that to start your wind down process as well. Stuff people don't think about is like alarm clocks. So if you have like a clock in your room that's a blue light, like that's something that'll affect it. They say buy them with the red. That's why you see alarms with the red lettering instead. So any kind of red doesn't register the brain like blue does. So you can have light, it's just the kind of light that you want to avoid. Trickier part is if you live like in a city, which I think we all do, is light that's coming through your window. So that's why like blackout curtains can be a really good thing, and just really making the room not much like a cave as possible can affect the quality of sleep. You may sleep like a rock, like I fall asleep in 15 seconds if you tell me to. It doesn't mean I'm sleeping well because some of those factors. So like curtains can be a big one. Um, Elise, what was the second thing you said? Eating late?
Uh, keep it like cool and dark.
Oh yeah. Yeah, your body tries to reduce its temperature in sleeping. So the cooler the room, the better the body sleeps. It like reacts better. Even like if we're talking about very high level athletes, they're even going to consider like what their sheets are made of. So like synthetic materials usually run a little hotter, so they would make sure like their sheets are 100% cotton, stuff like that. Not that we need to do that to an extent, but if one of us lands a Matt Frazier of the world and we're training for the games and we're trying to make them a fraction of a percent better because that could matter, that's something we would do. Have you guys ever heard Ben Bergeron talk about the hockey team? On a side tangent. So there was a I don't know what team, if it was NHL or college. I want to say it was college, and the coach had this theory that if we just do all of these little things, no matter how minimal they are, and we start to apply them, if they can raise our performance by a 0.5% through a year, but if we do 20 of them, our performance will be raised a significant amount. Like that's a philosophy that's taken, especially with like high level competitors. So like the sheets thing, getting pillows, mattresses, stuff like that. Those are all those like little 0.5%, 1% things that we can do to perform to advance that performance. And then last thing Elise brought up was the food. Obviously, if you eat really late, that stimulates your digestion. You want to be in like a rest, relax and rest mode. You don't want to be stimulating things. And then on top of it, if you're laying down, you start to get like digestion, stuff like that. You're going to be uncomfortable. Your sleep quality is not going to be there either. They even talk about if you're sensitive, avoiding like very acidic foods in the daytime. So if you know that's something that reacts with you, having that for lunch could technically affect your comfort level at night, even if it's like a subconscious. Let's see. I got a couple other ones. There's a couple other like simple big ones. You guys have any other ideas?
Yeah, I got some easy ones.
Go ahead.
Caffeine has a long half-life. So if you have basically caffeine after like 1 or 2 o'clock and you're going to bed by 10, you already have a ton of it
It's in your system. Yep. Yeah, caffeine's a big one.
Another really big one is bedtime consistency. If that changes and we're constantly changing like the wake and the bedtime, it's like almost like we're giving ourselves jet lag if we're constantly changing our wake time. There's some other really big ones too, but those are the two ones I can think of top of my head.
Yeah, I've got routine here. So just like falling into the same pattern every single night, like when you're going to bed. Like I've been trying to go ahead.
Alcohol absolutely wrecks our sleep.
Yeah, alcohol, people think you fall asleep better because you pass out, but the quality of sleep with alcohol, and I've also heard this with like edibles and like smoking weed. I don't know as much on that as I do alcohol. It's a terrible sleep quality. Have you guys ever like had a night out drinking with friends and then you kind of wake up in the night and your heart rate's like 130 and it's the most uncomfortable thing in the world? Like your body is working very hard to get that out because I mean you essentially poisoned yourself right before going to bed. It can't just sit there. Alcohol is a good one because some people like to go have their glass of wine so they go to bed better, but not realizing they're actually affecting the quality.
And also, I can give you some information on the weed because I've been curious about it. So it doesn't have nearly the same harmful effects that alcohol does,
but it experimenting.
Yeah, it does screw up your pattern. So like you'll lose a lot of deep sleep and you'll lose even some of the REM sleep with weed. And
but affects like the state that you actually are able to get in while sleeping.
Correct. And then in the deep sleep phase is where we get most of the physical restoration. And then REM sleep, we get most of like the cognitive, the memory storage kind of restoration. So take it with a grain of salt, I guess.
And like really the two main ones that we want. I know deep for like athletic performance is the most beneficial. What else were they talking about? Like having that night routine, like Elise was saying, like people like to fall asleep with the TV on. It's a hard habit to break, but like having that shut off at a certain time. If you have like your time before bed where it's not on, they say like find something that's very like soothing to you. Like each of us would be really different on this call. Like I like to make warm tea, and for me, warm tea is a very soothing process. Just make sure you're not drinking one with like a bunch of caffeine in it. But like making teas, some people like to try to do like that to calm them down. Some people like an actual book and reading that makes me fall asleep in like 15 seconds. So finding something that is a good routine that you do every night, that's almost like you're like letting yourself detach from everything and start to actually come down, right? And then, stuff like that, if you find something, it's also not going to be as jarring and alerting than if you're on like Instagram. You're on Instagram and you see something that isn't your favorite, right? It could be something of politics and it fires you up a little bit, or it could be, someone crashing their car and it gives you anxiety. It doesn't matter what it is, but like that, those are going to be jolting and adding stress, which is going to add cortisol, which is going to mess up your sleep potentially also. Let me see if I have any more. Putting your phone on do not disturb, right? Making sure no alerts come through. That's a big one. I don't know a lot about this, but they say being connected to Wi-Fi, especially if that's like right by your head, can be a little disturbing to people. Some people get very sensitive on that. I used to work in the doctor's office, and there was a girl that came in that was like just wrecked. She wasn't sleeping, nothing. And the doctor eventually found out she had her modem under her bed. And he was like, take that out, put that in another room. And she slept instantaneously. And it solved a lot of problems. So I know some people are more sensitive to others when it comes to that. I don't know a ton about it, but it's just something to consider. Like if your phone's by your head or you're sleeping like close to a router and stuff. Um, this is a tough one, but like pets, right? Pets can certainly wreck your sleep. I'm not telling you to kick your dog or your cat out, but to be aware that they may be up and down and causing issues. I guess if you make that argument, you could also kick out a significant other. I don't know that that would go well though. Let's see if I missed any. And we do this every day, but exercising. So like if we have a client that's having trouble with sleeping and they're, um, let's say they're not super consistent with the gym and they're coming 3 days a week, like we may recommend, hey, just go outside and go for a walk if you're not going to be here. Like have some kind of activity, make them tired. Oh, I missed one. Sound machines, like white noise. There's different kinds you can even find.
Yeah,
There's like
green noise, I
green,
think
there's pink,
it's a big one
there's
now.
brown. Yeah. I don't remember what color it is, but there's a color that I really like. It's not white. You don't even need a machine. You can actually go on Spotify and find like 15 hours of playing. The only thing I will say is make sure that you restart that every night because one time I did not restart that and I got to the end and it was an advertisement and it scared the living shit out of me because it was on full blast. So just be aware if you're going to end up doing something like that. But especially if you live in an apartment and you have neighbors walking around upstairs or people, I have a guy that starts his, I don't know what Mustang, but it is so fucking loud and he goes to work at 4:30 every morning and it wakes me up every single morning and he parks outside of my window. So sound machine would help situations like that. Any other questions or comments on like tools for sleeping?
Are you familiar with non-sleep deep rest?
No.
NSDR. It also has another name, Yoga Nidra. I'm not sure if you've heard of Yoga Nidra. Nidra means sleep. And so it's a protocol that is often done for either the benefits of helping to go to sleep, or also it's used to help with memory. And so basically it's like a body scan, and you can use it either during the day at any point, and it helps you fall asleep when you're going to sleep at night, or you can do it if you're having a hard time going to sleep at night, and you can do it's a guided body scan. They're all over YouTube for free, and it's very available. And I forgot the mechanism behind of how it works, but there's been some good research that shows utilizing these kind of like 10-minute body scans helps with the process of sleeping.
Can you share that also in the group?
Oh yeah, I'll send you that.
Yeah, because I think it's definitely, especially when it comes to falling asleep, like each person is going to be super different. Like I had a member at Riptide talk to me about how he meditates, and what he told me works within like 30 seconds to 60 seconds if I can't sleep. And his thing was he just imagines he's floating, and his goal is to start sinking. And what he said is your thoughts is you floating up. So you're trying to continuously sink. And he was like, the problem is people when they think, they're like, oh no, I'm thinking, and they act like it's a bad thing. And he's like, thinking's okay. We just want to reset that process every time we catch ourselves thinking or like floating to the top. And that like thought of sinking for me is like lights out like a baby. I know for other people I've explained it to, they're like, it doesn't do anything. I just think more and then I get more wired. So share that because that could be a good tool for sure too. Anything else you guys have? Well, I know people take melatonin to help with circadian rhythm. The only thing I would say is like not getting caught on something that's like a prescription suppressant. Like you don't want to become reliant on that stuff. And then eventually it really doesn't work too well anyway until you get used to it. All right, let's talk stress and cortisol, which we know is very tied into sleep. What was some of you guys' like thoughts on that video? If you got to watch it. from Power Monkey Camp out of it. All right, so let's just get into it. All right, so stress, like having that, especially if it's constant or like at an event, burns a shitload of calories. Right? He started talking about some chess players that burned. They were all they did was play chess for 6 hours and burned an ungodly amount of calories. Not because they were doing anything physical or thinking, but because they were so stressed out about losing because it was like a championship. So if we take that of stress and we're CrossFitters and we do exercise and we're nervous for a competition or nervous for the open or quarterfinal and things like that, just the stress alone is going to be a signal to us that we probably need to consume more. So we talked about competition eating and raising those calories, especially the carbohydrates, like not only for what's happening physically, but then you take into consideration that, like it goes to show how important that is. That if you don't eat because you have high cortisol, because you don't have an appetite, like you're basically just burying yourself, especially on an event like that. Cortisol is a stress hormone, right? And a lot of people view it as a very bad thing, and it can be a bad thing, but it's a very necessary thing too. So cortisol has some good stuff it does for our body. It wakes us up in the morning, right? So when we get up, we have a spike. It alerts us a little bit, and we kind of start our day. That spike should gradually fall like through our day and as it goes. Sometimes it doesn't, and when it doesn't is like those people that are chronic stressed and they have just like a constant and basically what happens is they're just in a constant like fight or flight mode, and because of that flight or flight mode our brain's like something's wrong, like we're in this like preservation of survival basically. So because of that preservation and survival, our brain wants to make everything that could potentially save our life accessible. So it loads our bloodstream with any extra like sugar, and it starts to make yourself like insulin resistant. So when someone's very, very stressed, and then we start to say like, how does someone have a big belly just because of stress, but they eat pretty well? That's how. So you see how it starts to get very tied into some of the chronic disease. And then if we're adding on that they're not sleeping well, so cortisol levels are not getting lower, and then they're eating bad food. So then we're also putting a lot of stuff into the body that's gonna be very be very bad and lead us more to chronic disease. You see how they all start to tie in and they can all start to snowball on each other. Because of the fight or flight, and because we're in like this state of I don't want to die, basically, if we're talking from like a very like caveman level, it makes available a lot of resources too. So when we talk about our training, we go to the gym and we work out, we're having cortisol spike. That's a stressful moment. We want that to happen. Because that happens, it makes all these resources more available for our muscles and to even start the repair process, post training, right? All that blood sugar comes out. We know we use some of that blood sugar for energy. And then when we have that, we can start to kind of refill glycogen stores and things like that. So cortisol is not a bad thing when it's used where it needs to be used. It's a bad thing when it's constant, basically, or we end up on a flip cycle, which I'll talk about. So we know lack of sleep, right? That's not going to clear it. That's going to make it more. Some like signs of it is like people get like the body fat right in the midsection, right? It's like a cortisol like bloat almost. We also know that's tied into what? This is a hard question. You see somebody and they have skinny arms, normal legs, and they just have this big belly in their midsections, like they look like a pear. You're muted, D.
I mean, you just said it. Isn't it stress?
Stress is part of it, but what's something else that we know may be going on with the person that they have? This is a hard question. It could be insulin resistant. So insulin resistance a lot of times shows like a midsection belly. And then what I was just saying, the stress like what cortisol does is puts blood sugar in and makes insulin more resistant, basically. So you can see how those two things can be very tied in together. So if you have someone that the cortisol is doing that and they're eating McDonald's and desserts, it's just a recipe for a massive disaster. They don't feel hungry, so they don't really have an appetite. That's a really easy one. Like when you get really, really stressed out, like eating's not the most fun thing, right? So usually appetite goes away, especially like you guys that go to competitions and it's hard to eat. And, you know, we do liquids and fruits and light things because of that. That's just the stress of it. Did I miss anything? They're usually very tired in the morning. So that this is like the flip cycle. They're super groggy. They don't want to get up. And then toward the night at like 9, 10 p.m., they have all the energy in the world. Usually you'll see they don't want to eat in the morning. They have a lot of energy at night. They have a midsection belly. Sex drive can go away as well. And then another one is they get up multiple times a year. So those are all signs that cortisol is really, really high. Let's say you're like, damn, and they just describe like what's happening with me or a client I know. What would be the first thing that you would start to like really drive home and recommend?
Find like stress reliever.
Yeah, for sure. But like 100% on the stress reliever. But like we don't know maybe what's stressing them out. Maybe it's their job, maybe it's their significant other. Like it could be something that they can't just be like, bye, right? So what's something that they can start to like, this is a little more in my control and I can start to focus on?
I'll start working out, start trying to eat better.
Biggest one.
What?
Get more sleep.
Yeah.
Sleep would be the biggest thing. If I have someone that's super, super stressed out and they're not really sleeping great and all these other things aren't good, like if I just give them more workouts, I'm probably going to bury them more. So like even though they may be super anxious to start working out and eating healthy because that's how they see they're going to lose the weight or start to feel better, it is a part of the equation, but if they need to probably focus on sleep first. And then once they have the sleep down, that's only going to make the eating healthy better because now the appetite's not all fucked up and all over the place. They have energy to actually work out now and they're going to look more forward to that. So if the sleep's not there, everything else is going to really not fall into place well. So sleep would be the one thing we can control. Like I can't tell them to divorce their wife, right? So let's just try to start sleeping better and start with that and then work from there. As far as the training goes, what if we're trying to get cortisol more at bay? We think someone has too much of it and they're too stressed out. Like what's going to be a very important factor in their training that they need to be doing every week? Not that Justin's super stressed out. He just started doing it on Thursdays. We have to make sure they rest. Yeah. If they're at this point where they're super stressed out, they're not recovering, they're not sleeping well, and they're working out 6 days a week or every day, it's doing nothing for them. That's a person where we're going to say you are overtraining. I think overtraining can be a hard thing to get to sometimes, and our bodies are capable of a lot. But that would be a really good example of like we need to back off. That's someone they should be at least probably having 2 days of rest a week. I think going 6 days a week is like you're gonna walk a teeter line sometimes of that, even if you're not super stressed out. But definitely at least 2 full rest days on that. Sleeping good, not overtraining. They are getting some exercise in. We have to make sure they're eating enough, right? So under eating is going to cause cortisol too. So we got to make sure enough food is actually going in. We talked about what some of the signs were last week on that call. If someone's under eating, so we can look at that, and then making sure it's whole foods, making sure it's quality. Obviously, we know all the benefits of that, but just saying we're taking a system that may be inflamed because we're putting processed foods in is going to not help the stress of the body also. So we have to make sure that we're not adding any fuel to the fire when it comes to stuff like that. Hydrating's there. and you'll see as well as like when someone's not eating enough. Have you ever come across someone that's doing macros and they're eating like 1,200 calories a day? Like we've kind of come across those members and you're like, well, what are you eating? And they're like, well, I do a shake for breakfast, I skip lunch, and then I eat a dinner. And you're like, oh, you're not eating good. And in their head, because they're not eating a lot, they're going to lose this weight. A lot of times, what'll happen is you'll see that like midsection rounding, and it's the belly they want to lose, and it's because of not enough food's going in. They have that like cortisol belly. So that's something to also look at. That's a very hard person to get them to understand that like you probably need 2,000 more calories. That's going to be like a panic moment in their head, and they're going to be like, "Oh God, the coach is trying to feed me more. I'm not losing weight on this, and he thinks eating more is going to help." So that would be like a trickle effect you would probably take with that person for most people. Um, and then the last thing is mitigating as much emotional stress as possible. I think that's a very hard one.
So I want to go back, Nate, and it made me think about the conversation that's like always rampant, the calorie in, calorie out kind of debate that it's not really much a debate anymore. I think it's kind of gone. But like you can have the low calorie count and have more like belly fat than
It
you would
cause
if you
more
had a high
issues.
calorie count. It's like an easy, you can use as an easy way to get someone up to proper, nutritional calorie count.
And it's also just like it's like anything, right? Like too little of something is it may not be a good thing. Too much of something may not be a good thing. So it's like really finding balance. If we don't train enough, we're not going to get fitter. If we train too much, we start to bury ourselves and we overtrain. Same thing with food. Um, I do think the calorie in versus calorie out now is like people don't put, I don't want to say people in our space don't put everything in that basket. They know it's a slice to the pie, but they know it's not lived by. But I think a lot of people that are especially coming into our gym still, and their number one thing is I want to lose weight. Like there's a good chance everything is still in that basket for them of calories in versus calories. That's where that education like teaches people about what that like very high stress cortisol belly is, or when they're very insulin resistant, what that looks like, and knowing those signs can help you really find what's going to be right for an individual.
I have some things to say that it just remind me, Justin,
Go ahead, Jose.
that I'm like one of the regulators for the glucose is actually cortisol. So if you are doing too much fasting, it will also increase the cortisol. So if you are like trying to not eating, like losing weight by not eating, you will probably could also do the opposite and not losing weight at all. And the another another of um the regulators for cortisol is also the light. There's a light exposure. For example, like people having heart attacks when the sun comes out is like very very common. Like having or
because
even
their cortisol spikes on their like circadian
3
rhythm.
a.m. having strokes or stuff like that or heart attacks. So there are some times that people cannot lose weight and it's like everything is going fine. So it's like sometimes they work in the night and they are already stressed for work and then they come out, the sun comes out and then they have more spike for the cortisol. So like people with night shifts can also sometimes cannot lose weight because of that. They have the so it should be low the levels of the hormones and then but they are high on the stress during the work hours and then they come out to the sunlight and then higher, even higher. So night shift.
And that would be a person I would say that like they're almost trying to flip their circadian rhythm totally. Like when they go home and go to sleep, like I would say that person's it's more important to have a room that's completely like blacked out so they could get really quality, because they're working a night shift. Because I mean, we can't control what they do for work, but we can try to make it the best case scenario as well. I'm a really good example of this in a bad way. So like 2021, I weighed 180 pounds. You can see abs. I was the fittest I ever was. I started to get really stressed. And in my stress, everything kind of like started to fall into place. Like I started gaining weight. I started sleeping very little at night. I was working too long of hours. Because of all that, then I was like not cooking and eating whole foods as much. And then bad food started going in. And then eventually it got to the point where I recognized I need to clean my diet up because I've gained weight, started eating better, didn't have an appetite, so ate too little for a very long time, even though it was good food, and continued to actually still gain weight. Workouts weren't good. I was always getting trashed. Didn't matter what it was, even if it was something I liked. Like it was just this snowball that started to roll, and it gained too much steam, so it was hard to stop. And unfortunately, I think for most people, it's very hard to pull them out of that because you can't just shake up and change their whole life. I was very lucky to be able to do that and kind of put a stop to everything and like restart. So it can be very, very hard for people to get out of. And I think, especially when you're working with clients, be okay with like, this is going to take time, and let's start with, most people will start with one thing. Let's get that down, and then we're going to go to the next and start to build that building in those blocks, like one by one. Because what you also don't want to do, if someone's really, really stressed, and then you're like, hey, you have to eat this, you have to sleep this, you have to work out this, and you start giving them all these things, what could you do? You could have just accidentally, yeah, you could stress them out and made it worse. So
Probably the workout is go to sleep sometimes.
Probably, yeah. Have you guys ever seen Jason Ackerman's post? He has this little like whiteboard. And he has one that says you sleeping an extra hour is probably more important than waking up at 4 a.m. for your WOD. That's why he has that whiteboard. I think we have to understand though why he puts that whiteboard out, and like not everybody should be like, oh fuck it, I'm not going to work out because sleep is more important, and they never work out. Like it's got to be taken the right way on that. But that's why he has that, because sleep is so important,
I
especially when you
also
don't have enough.
just reminded something. Like a patient couldn't lose weight. How are you doing these things right? And he was like, yeah, are you moving? Yes. 10,000. This was what I was shadowing a cardiologist. And he said, okay, what's your tracker? 10,000 steps every day. They're moving. And this guy says, yes, because I move at work. I walk at work a lot. So that's where I'm doing. He's like, no, that's not the same thing. The hormones that you have at work is like, yeah, you're moving, but it's not the same that hey, I'm gonna give myself an hour of moving outside, relaxed. So it's a different stressor. It's not the same thing like channeling by adrenaline that you have in work, that by a different, when you are okay, this is my hour for working out. I'm going to just walk my 10,000 steps, but in this hour, relaxed.
A great example is we all coach and have been on the floor like of something like that, right? And when I coach, I take my watch tells me I take anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 steps a class, which is a lot. I just walk in circles the entire time, basically. Um, and I coached this morning, and my heart rate was at 124. So, like, if you're classifying it just from data, I had like a very mild workout this morning, right? It also gives you show how much job can input into like macros. I didn't finish that class and was like chatty and had this dopamine response that I have when I work out and I finish class. So like just that alone can be a very like eye-opening thing. Like I finished class and I was worked up and anxious because I'm like so locked in and I'm actually stressing about the job I'm doing, versus when I finish a workout in class, I'm happy as can be. If I was in a bad mood, I'm no longer in a bad mood. I'm in a good mood. You ever notice classes talk more in the end? They get all chatting with each other usually post workout. It's because everyone's filled with dopamine now and they're in a good mood. So they're more, lively and friendly. So that's a really good example, Jose, of like there is a difference of what's happening like, hormonally between work exercise, which is not really exercise, it's more of a stressor, and then like exercise, we are stressing ourselves, but we get that like dopamine response too. So do you guys see how if we don't sleep, it raises cortisol. If we're stressed out, it raises cortisol. If we eat bad, it inflames the body, it raises cortisol. and like how all it's like a big web of everything super tied in. And cortisol also makes us insulin resistant. If we eat too much processed foods and we're getting constant sugary substances, we become insulin resistant because eventually we can't pump enough insulin to bring that down. If we're sleeping, then we're not. You see how it's like if one leg falls off, it's like a table. That table's not going to be functioning well. We need all the legs on the table to have a very healthy system and a very healthy body. Why you see like these like life coaches and they're like, oh, we take a 360 view of everything. We have, you know, physical, emotional, sleep, and there's all these pies. It's because they really do. It's not singular things. They really are all interconnected. So it is a very important thing in like education for us to know to coach somebody outside the gym as well as inside the gym. You have to push your knees out and squat. Any questions or statements on that? Does it make sense now why we just talked about nutrition and I kind of wanted to end our nutrition with like the sleep and stress topic? There's one other thought I have that when Justin and Jose were chatting, I kind of thought of. When we talk about someone undereats, it causes problems. So when we look at something like intermittent fasting, that's something that we have to really analyze. Is that going to be the right thing for the person? So if we have someone that's insulin resistant and we want them to like get that under control, intermittent fasting can be very good because it helps regulate some blood sugar levels. However, if taking them and making them fast makes them eat far too less in the day, and we're starting to spike up the cortisol, then it's not worth it. If we have an athlete on a totally different flip, and they're going to be intermittent fasting, and then they're not eating enough because their window of feeding is too small, then intermittent fasting can be detrimental there too. That makes sense? If I have someone that's just eating too much, and by making them intermittent fast, they don't eat enough, or I won't say don't eat enough, but it cuts some food out, but they're still eating enough, it can be very beneficial. So you have to look at it from like, what is the person doing? What is their goals? What are they trying to accomplish? And like, does this actually fit in well with them? Because I do think the intermittent fast was a super popular trend at one point in time, and everyone was just trying to do it, but not everyone was doing it well. So I think it can be a tool or a tool belt to use, but that may not be appropriate for every person. Usually the more advanced they are in dieting, the better they are at intermittent fasting.
They've also have not debunked, but some of the initial claims that they thought were benefits have not really have shown in some of the more new research that have came out. So really, like, and one of the pitfalls of intermittent fasting is that people do not get the proper protein intake because they're cutting out a whole meal, and it makes it really challenging to get the proper protein intake. So I know a lot of people that were like really die hard about intermittent fasting, like even 2 years ago, have basically said, we're okay with it. Or if they don't like having breakfast in the morning, they're now having a protein shake in the morning just to start accumulating more
Get
protein.
that in.
That's one
It's
thing.
very hard, in my opinion, to get all like the macros that you should get in when you take that eating window and you drop it. I think it's incredibly hard.
And one more thing I was going to mention on nutrition or eating, I think I may have mentioned it in the past, but it kind of falls in line with what we're talking about with like regulating the nervous system, which we can do through sleep and other kind of recovery, is that if we are eating and trying to digest while we're in a sympathetic nervous system state, you know, that higher cortisol levels even, and we're just more the adrenaline flowing through us, the digestive system is less efficient. And it's almost as if we're eating a meal, that we're eating an additional like 130 calories, I think what like some of the data is showing. So it's like, it shows the importance of before having a meal to make sure we're like somewhat like regulated, not like getting right done with like a heavy like cycle off the barbell and then like trying to eat a meal. Like, take some of that time to relax.
And you know what kind of falls into that, and I mean part of it can be out of our control too, is like a 30-minute lunch break, right? And you have to like rush to eat, you sprint to eat. It's like a stressful thing because you have to get back to work on time and you don't have that much time. But that's another really good example. There's a whole protocol that has to do with eating around like the nervous system, and like the timing of eating for like that reason. To like try to eat when you're like always rested and digested and not, fight or flight. I'll see if I can find any more info on that. I know the guy who used to talk about it, but I don't know if it's his course or if it was somebody else's. You guys have any other thoughts or statements on stress or sleep?
Yeah, Nate, when you mentioned more of like a holistic approach to wellness, and how it's related to stress or cortisol levels or anxiety, I wanted to share that our brain functioning is very similar to our muscular functioning. That the way that we think is tantamount to the way that we train. So, for example, we're trying to run, a fast 5K. We're going to run every day, and we're going to choose those appropriate strategies or appropriate training mechanisms to achieve that goal. Our brain functioning is very similar. So we have neurons within our brain and different synapses that connect those different neurons. And those synapses are developed through experiences, right? Positive experiences or negative experiences will create these synapses between neurons, and those are very strong. So when we have negative thinking processes, right? So, for example, one of the other gym goers at my gym, during the open, he always says, and this is something that happened last year too, I always perform so poorly in front of people, or has a very
It
negative
happened.
view. Exactly. And that's the way he's thinking, training that brain negatively. So obviously an outcome is going to be negative, right? It's the same concept if we're not training physically the appropriate way for whatever our goal is, running a 5K, lifting, a max clean and jerk, then we're not going to be successful. Our brains are the same way. And this applies to, let's say, individuals with, extreme anxiety or panic attacks, where we have a negative experience with someone socially at the coffee shop, and then all day you ruminate and you overanalyze and you think about it, you go down the rabbit hole. Same concept with our brains, right? So the way that I, with my clients, I suggest is cognitively our coach versus our critic. Our critic are those negative thoughts that we put in our heads, the person that ruminates and keeps overanalyzing and thinks I should have said or handled this situation differently. And then our coach is, what, that's not overgeneralized. Let's think of a more positive manner. So the way that we think in our brains is very similar to the way that we train, physically.
I totally agree with that. It's a really good example too. Like, you guys ever lay in bed and you're like, I'm gonna go to sleep. And then you kind of realize that you're not falling asleep as fast as you can, and you start to think about you're not sleeping, and then that snowballs, and then it's an hour, and then it's 2 hours. Like, I would say that's a really good example that we have all lived through of exactly that. Chuck Carswell says something. He says, if you can't turn to the person next to you and say what you're thinking to yourself, then you should not be thinking it to yourself. So I used to think about that in workouts. Can I turn and say whatever the hell's in my head to any member that I don't even know? If the answer is no, then I should not be saying it to me. And I would say that's that critic versus coach like philosophy you have. I really like that. Something I've noticed in all the years of my coaching is when I have athletes that are sometimes not the most physically gifted, but they're so set on a goal and they hammer it and they believe they can get there, they get there. And then when I have athletes that are sometimes extremely physically talented, have all the physical tools, and they just don't believe it, or every day they have a barbell and they're like, this barbell is going to be heavy, they plateau even though they're doing macros, training every day. Like, what's happening in here is dictating what's happening everywhere else. So I 100% agree with that whole statement. And if nothing else is taken away from today's call, I would say that should be taken away from today's call. Thanks for chiming in on that. I have one last thought before we wrap up today that has nothing to do with sleep or stress. So do you guys have anything else on that front before I say my closing statement? Cool. So I was chatting with Elise before you guys got on a little bit, talking about the new gym I'm coaching with, and they're great. But the members are not super used to being like heavily coached. So when you coach somebody, they're kind of like thanks, but like they just don't love it, and you can tell they don't love it, and that'll be a culture shift, and we'll get there. That's fine. But something I took that experience and then thought with another conversation that I had with a girl that just took her level two. She took her level two and she was like, I'm so uncomfortable with the relentless piece. I don't like the relentless piece. She was a little shy. She's a quiet coach. She was one that was at Mako. And I just kind of started thinking of that and then having the experience with the members that weren't super, super used to coaching. You guys remember when CrossFit used to say forging elite fitness? When that was a thing. They don't really say it too much often, and I don't like it. I wish they would. And a thought that I had is when we coach and we're stepping on the floor, like we're doing that. We're forging elite fitness. But like even more so, I'm trying to forge this elite human. So if you give me somebody that's like, I'll do everything you say, just make me the best that you can be, like how relentless you would be on them, like you're gonna try to perfect all of these things. And I just thought of like having that thought and like I'm trying to make these elite badass humans, I am doing them a huge disservice if I'm being shy and I'm not giving them everything. Now that's not saying go to the gym today and just hit everybody with a hammer. Like know your personalities, know when to coach, know when to back off. But like we have all coached and had that moment in time where we know we can say something and correct something, and we just kind of say, "Oh, good job," and walk by. So if you guys can take that and make that, put that thought that like you're making badass people and you have the ability to make these insanely badass people, I think that would help with the mind frame of being too shy to be timid and like not relentless when you coach class. Does that make sense? Because it is a hard piece. It's not the most fun thing to have that relentless piece that like we learn to look into. So I think that can just help the mind frame of it.
So just to branch on that just a little bit. Best example this morning, and D, I don't think you know, but Nate, you know Judith. Okay, she's like
knows too.
Yeah, like just she's a tough client to crack. So we had running this morning. So it was 800-meter run, 36 lunges at 35 with 2 dumbbells, and then 600-meter run, 24 lunges. 400-meter run, 12 lunges, 200-meter run. So I'm running through the warm up, and there was running in the warm up. So she goes to the ski. And I'm like, Judith, why are you doing the ski? And she's like, oh, but I'm saving myself for the running because there's a lot of running. And I'm like, but you're not warming up for the run. And just because of just because of how she is as a coach, probably bad call on my part, but I just let it go because she's, again, knowing your clientele, like she's kind of like one of those that's like stuck in her ways and believes of doing it stuff her way. So I kind of just let it go. But she wanted to do the workout RX. And I was like, Judith, you're not going to make the stimulus. You need to scale the run. So like, I like went out there and I was like, hey, you're 2 minutes in, time to come in now. Like, just looking at the stimulus time. And she actually did that. But for something like that, like,
I think it's a couple things that play into that.
Well, I feel like being relentless there, I understand why she needs to run because she needs to prepare for the workout. But I feel like at that point, being relentless at that point can also turn into me being a little bit of an asshole.
Make a bad relationship between you guys.
Yes.
So I don't think, and like when I'm talking about like being relentless, like that's why I was like, don't just go into the gym and hammer people today because no one's gonna respond good to that, right? And they're gonna be like, shut up, and they're gonna be like, Elise is my least favorite coach now. So I don't mean that, but like it's our job to also morph the culture of what's happening, right? And like in a case like that, like I remember coaching her, she is very much like that. Like we want to morph like the culture of, we're all in class, we're all doing this together, and like making it more that like not that she feels uncomfortable, but like it becomes like almost like an oddball out. It's the reason that if you go into CrossFit Mayhem, you want to work hard, right? Like I don't want to do those terrible workouts; they destroy me. but everyone else is just grinding through these workouts and pushing so hard. I'm not going to be the guy that does it. Does that make sense? So I do think it's a little bit of a cultural thing. However, that takes time and that can take years.
Yeah.
And like occasionally you come across people that just aren't part of that culture and they do need to phase out at some point in time, and that's okay too. So I don't think it's something that like you could just flip on a dime. Um, but it's something you want to work toward. I think with that shifting culture, it also is our job to educate as well. Because if someone never understands on why do we do this, then they're never going to really want to be a part of it and like listen. Like if like for the example of the ski, like if you made the statement like you're not warming up any of the cords in your lower body and your feet because you're standing flat footed on a ski, and then you go run and you, let's just say worst case scenario, an Achilles pops, then that's like on me because I let you just do a hinge the whole time and you never even got that warm at a slower pace. You just went into a workout and tried to take off. So like that's a really easy one, but I think that education really comes into it as well. Like right now for my gym, we have a lot of people that think mayhem isn't good enough programming, which is a comical statement to say because you're saying Rich Froning and his team don't know what they're doing. Clearly, they know what they're doing, right? And then they make the comment that the programming is too easy. Why would it be too easy? Because they're probably not hitting the stimuluses that Mayhem is saying they need to be hitting. They're probably doing the workouts and going over caps and cruising, and then they're like, oh, it wasn't that bad. Instead of doing it in 12 minutes, they're doing it in 19, and they're just having a leisure day. So, like, that's part of their education of like understanding power outputs and things like that. Am I going to be able to sit everybody in class and do that? No, it's going to be like a trickle effect over time. So I would say in cases like that, it is tough. Um, that's more of a cultural change than just being coaching relentless. Coaching relentless would be like if her knees were collapsing in and you walked by and you said good job instead of stopping and making her push her knees out. You know, stuff like that too. That's the art of coaching, though. It's those tough situations and being able to deal with them. That's why we're customer service with a skill.
Yeah.
That was a
100%.
good one to bring up. Any other thoughts or questions on that? Crazy to think mayhem's too easy. I've died pretty much every day.
That's insane.
Yeah, that's part
I think
of
I've had to
that's gonna.
scale every single one of the workouts, and I've been time capped on probably most of them as well.
Yeah, part